The case of the St. John shooter, a child's burden. The peaceful, rural town of St. John's, Arizona, a community where life moved at a gentle, predictable pace, was shattered by a crime so unthinkable that it would forever alter its sense of security. The victims were Vincent Romero, a 29-year-old devoted father, and Timothy Romans, a 39-year-old longtime family friend and co-worker. Both men were found inside Romero's home, their lives brutally taken by multiple gunshots. The scene was one of shocking violence, a grim tableau of blood on the floor and bullet casings scattered on the ground. But what made the crime even more disturbing was the identity of the suspected killer, an 8-year-old boy. The initial discovery, made by a concerned co-worker of Timothy Romans, led police to an unsettling scene. The eerie stillness of the house was a stark counterpoint to the violent tableau inside. The bodies of Vincent and Timothy lay in a scene of shocking carnage, and the air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the sterile odor of gun smoke. The police meticulously documented the scene, their movements slow and deliberate, as they tried to make sense of the senseless. Their attention was soon drawn to a trail of blood leading away from the bodies and to the presence of a weapon, a 9mm handgun. It was a chilling detail, a piece of the puzzle that pointed to an unimaginable truth. The investigation took a pivotal turn when the police were led to the home of a local woman named Sarah, where they found the 8-year-old boy. The boy, a small figure in a world of adult chaos, was found hiding under the blankets of a bed. His young face was a mask of fear, and his eyes, wide with a profound and terrible knowledge, held a secret he was not yet ready to share. He was taken into custody, a small, quiet presence in the back of a police car. The police were faced with a dilemma that was both legally and morally complex. They had in their custody an 8-year-old boy, a child who, in a world of justice, was too young to understand the gravity of his actions, and yet they were certain that he was the person responsible for the horrific crime. They had found the 9mm handgun in his possession, a cold and final piece of evidence that connected him to the murder. The unthinkable trial. The legal proceedings that followed were a long and meticulous process, a public airing of a private tragedy. The boy's lawyer argued that a child of his age could not possibly be held responsible for such an act. He was a child, a mind still in its nascent stages of development, and he could not comprehend the finality of death. He was not old enough to form the intent to kill, a crucial legal point that would be at the center of the case. The prosecution, on the other hand, argued for a different narrative. They painted a picture of a child who, with a shocking and terrifying lack of emotion, had taken 2 lives. They presented evidence of the boy's calm and detached demeanor, his lack of remorse, and his cold, almost clinical, recounting of the events. The child had, in a calm and dispassionate voice, recounted the events of the evening. He had stated that he had found the gun in his father's drawer, that he had taken it to the house, and that he had shot Vincent and Timothy. He had then returned the gun to his father's drawer and gone to bed, as if nothing had happened. The lack of emotion, the chilling clarity of his story, was a terrifying testament to a mind that was unable to process the gravity of its actions. The trial, a legal spectacle of a child accused of an adult crime, was a constant presence in the national media. The public was transfixed, their attention drawn to the grim and fascinating story of an 8-year-old killer. The courtroom was filled with the raw emotion of a grieving family and the calculated legal arguments of lawyers. The defense, in a last-ditch effort to save the boy from a life in prison, argued that he was suffering from a mental illness, a condition that had caused him to act in a way that was beyond his control. They spoke of the boy's troubled past, his difficult upbringing, and the trauma he had endured. They argued that he was not a monster, but a victim of a system that had failed him. The prosecution, however, was unyielding. They argued that the boy's actions were a clear sign of premeditation and that he should be tried as an adult. They presented evidence of the boy's internet searches, which revealed a morbid interest in murder, crime, and weapons. The searches were not random, but a roadmap to the crime. The burden of intent. The central argument of the prosecution rested on the concept of mens rea, the legal term for a guilty mind, or criminal intent. The prosecutor contended that despite his young age, the boy demonstrated a clear understanding of his actions and their fatal consequences. They pointed to the meticulous way he had carried out the crime. He had obtained the gun, gone to the specific location, committed the murders, and then attempted to conceal the weapon and his involvement. The prosecution argued that a child who could perform such a sequence of events with such chilling calm had the capacity for criminal intent. They brought in a forensic psychologist who testified that the boy's apparent lack of emotion was not a sign of immaturity, but a symptom of a deep-seated psychological disturbance. This expert suggested that the boy suffered from a severe conduct disorder and had a disturbing lack of empathy, a chilling trait that enabled him to commit such a violent act without any apparent remorse. The defense countered with a parade of child psychologists and developmental experts who spoke of the boy's cognitive immaturity. They argued that an 8-year-old's brain is not fully developed and that he would have been unable to grasp the finality of death in the same way an adult would. They presented evidence of his difficult home life, a chaotic environment filled with neglect and exposure to violence. The defense suggested that the boy's actions were a product of this environment, a desperate and misguided attempt to gain attention or to express a deep-seated rage he was unable to articulate. They argued that he had learned to act without emotion as a coping mechanism, a way to survive a childhood filled with turmoil. The internet searches, they claimed, were simply the result of a child's natural curiosity, a dark fascination with a world he did not understand. The courtroom became a stage for a complex and agonizing debate about the nature of childhood and the limits of legal responsibility. The victims' families, their grief a palpable presence in the courtroom, watched in silent agony as their loved ones' deaths were dissected in a grim and methodical manner. A verdict of unprecedented proportions. After weeks of testimony, the jury was left to deliberate, a task that was as emotionally and legally complex as any in the history of American jurisprudence. They had to decide whether a child of 8 could be held responsible for a crime that was so brutal and so final. They had to decide whether the law, a system of rules and regulations designed to protect society, could be applied to a mind that was still in its nascent stages of development. The deliberation was long and difficult, and the verdict, when it was finally read, sent a shockwave through the courtroom. The boy was found guilty of murder. The verdict was a grim and unprecedented victory for the prosecution, a legal ruling that would forever alter the way the American justice system viewed juvenile crime. The boy, who had been a quiet and almost detached presence throughout the trial, showed no visible reaction to the verdict. The judge, in a somber and solemn voice, sentenced him to a lengthy term in a juvenile detention facility, a sentence that was meant to be both a form of punishment and a form of rehabilitation. The sentence was a compromise, an attempt to balance the need for justice with the recognition of the boy's young age. The judge spoke of the boy's need for extensive psychological counseling and therapy, a glimmer of hope for a mind that was still in its formative years. The lingering questions and lasting impact. For the conviction of the 8-year-old boy did not bring an end to the debate. Legal experts, child advocates, and the public continued to grapple with the implications of the verdict. The case became a permanent fixture in the annals of true crime, a cautionary tale of a child's descent into darkness and a legal system's struggle to find a way to deal with a crime that was both a product of an individual's will and an environment's influence. The boy, now a ward of the state, was transferred to a juvenile detention facility where he would be under constant supervision and receive extensive psychological treatment. He was a small, quiet presence in a world of hardened criminals, a child in a man's world. The other inmates, aware of the nature of his crime, shunned him, and he was forced to live a life of profound isolation. The case also had a lasting impact on the town of St. John's. The peaceful, rural community was forever altered by the crime. Neighbors, who had once trusted one another, now looked at each other with suspicion. The innocence of the town was gone, replaced by a sense of fear and unease. The memory of the crime, a grim and haunting presence, would forever haunt the quiet streets. The case of the 8-year-old boy became a symbol of a lost innocence, a painful reminder that even in the most idyllic of settings, hidden secrets and simmering resentments can lead to unimaginable tragedy. The story of the St. John's shooter was a grim and haunting tale of a child's descent into darkness and a community's struggle to come to terms with a crime that was both a product of an individual's will and an environment's influence. The legal battle continued in the years that followed. The boy's lawyers, relentless in their pursuit of justice, filed numerous appeals, arguing that the verdict was a miscarriage of justice and that their client had been a victim of a system that was ill-equipped to handle such a complex case. They argued that the boy's mental state at the time of the crime had not been fully understood and that he had been unjustly convicted. The appeals were consistently denied, but the legal debate continued, a constant reminder of the profound questions that the case had raised. The boy, now a teenager, continued to live a life of isolation and psychological treatment, his future a grim and uncertain prospect. The memory of his crime, a grim and haunting presence, would forever define his life. The case of Valentine Calt, the Lanniw tragedy. The quiet town of Lanniw, nestled in the serene iron department of eastern France, was a place where life unfolded with the gentle predictability of a slow-moving river. It was a community where the rhythms of nature dictated the pace of existence, and the bonds between neighbors were forged in a shared sense of peace and security. The summer of 2008 was no different, with the warm air and long sun-drenched days offering a familiar comfort. For 11-year-old Valentine Calt, the season was an invitation to adventure. He was a bright and cheerful boy, his spirit as boundless as the clear summer sky, and his love of cycling was a familiar sight to everyone in the town. His bicycle, a symbol of his freedom and his adventurous spirit, was his constant companion. On the evening of July 28, a day like any other, Valentine set out on his bicycle, a small figure in a world of growing dusk. He pedaled through the quiet streets, the soft hum of his tires on the pavement, the only sound in the warm, still air. His family, used to his routine, felt no sense of unease, but unbeknownst to them, this routine ride would be his last. The following morning, the town's tranquility was shattered by a growing sense of dread. Valentine had not returned home. His family, their hearts filled with a frantic worry, immediately alerted local authorities, and a search was launched. The tight-knit community, a network of concern and support, rallied together. They scoured the town and the surrounding areas, their voices calling out his name, their faces etched with a profound and terrible fear. The search was a testament to the town's unity, but it was also a grim and desperate race against time. Tragically, The worst fears of the community were soon confirmed. Valentine's lifeless body was discovered, a grim tableau of innocence and brutality. The sheer horror of the discovery sent a shockwave through the community, but the details of the crime were even more horrifying. He had been stabbed 44 times, a number that painted a picture of a deeply disturbed perpetrator and a violence so senseless it defied all comprehension. The town, reeling from the incomprehensible violence, struggled to comprehend how such a horrific act could have taken place in their peaceful enclave. As investigators delved into the case, they were met with a perplexing lack of immediate leads. There were no eyewitnesses, no clear motive, and the randomness of the crime suggested it was not a planned act. The crime was a puzzle with missing pieces, a mystery that added to the community's profound sense of unease. However, a breakthrough came when authorities apprehended a drifter named Sten Morit and his companion, Noella Higo. The pair had been wandering from town to town for years, living on the fringes of society. Their transient lifestyle had made them difficult to track, but certain patterns in their movements aligned with the timeline of Valentine's murder. Under intense interrogation, Merritt confessed to the crime, claiming he was overcome by a moment of madness. His erratic behavior and history of mental instability added a complex layer to the case. Higo, while not directly involved in the murder, was charged with failing to prevent the crime and concealing evidence. The trial that ensued captivated the nation as details of the couple's nomadic existence and the senselessness of their actions came to light. The legal proceedings, a public airing of a private tragedy, were a long and meticulous process. Psychiatric evaluations played a significant role as the court grappled with questions of culpability and mental health. The unseen world of a drifter, the arrest of Sten Morit and Noella Higo did little to ease the grief that had settled over Lanu. The murder of Valentine Kalt was not just a crime, it was an incomprehensible act of brutality that shattered the town's sense of security. Families no longer let their children roam freely, and the atmosphere of trust that had defined the community was replaced by a lingering sense of fear. The question of what had driven Morit to target an innocent child remained unanswered, a grim and haunting presence in the town's collective consciousness. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they uncovered a disturbing history. Sten Morit and Noella Higo were not ordinary drifters. They had spent years wandering across France, living a nomadic existence that kept them disconnected from society. Morit, a man with an unsettling presence, had long exhibited signs of severe mental illness. He was plagued by paranoid delusions, convinced that he was on a special mission from a higher power. He spoke of visions and cryptic instructions from unseen forces, his reality a separate and terrifying world from the one everyone else inhabited. Higo, his devoted partner, appeared to be both his enabler and his guardian, clinging to him with an almost fanatical loyalty. Instead of seeking help for his deteriorating mental state, she reinforced his delusions, supporting his increasingly erratic behavior. The couple had no fixed home, no stable jobs, and no clear purpose, only an erratic journey that had led them through countless towns, always moving, always avoiding attachment. In the days leading up to Valentine's murder, they had been seen in a nearby town, their presence unsettling to witnesses. Merritt's wild-eyed expressions and Higo's quiet but intense demeanor left a trail of unease in their wake. On the evening of July 28, 2008, they arrived in Lanu. No one knows exactly what went through Merritt's mind when he saw Valentine riding his bicycle through the town. Perhaps it was a sudden impulse, an urge he couldn't control. Perhaps he believed he was following one of his so-called divine commands. What was clear was that he had no connection to the boy, no reason to target him, only a violent madness that erupted without warning. The gruesome evidence and a nation's debate. The autopsy report painted a picture of unimaginable horror. Valentine had fought back, but the sheer number of stab wounds, 44 in total, painted a terrifying picture of a frenzied and brutal attack. Some of the wounds were deep, inflicted with a terrifying force, while others seemed more frenzied, as if the attacker had lost himself in a blind rage. The boy's small body had been left on the side of the road, his bicycle lying nearby, a symbol of a life cut short. It was a crime of pure chaos, devoid of any discernible motive, making it all the more terrifying to a nation that was struggling to make sense of the senseless. After the murder, Merritt and Higo did not run far. They continued their aimless wandering, as if nothing had happened. When police finally tracked them down, they found the pair in a makeshift camp outside another small village. Merritt seemed almost detached from reality, while Higo remained eerily calm. Neither showed any immediate remorse for the crime. The trial that followed was one of the most complex legal proceedings in France in recent years. The central question was not whether Emuerd had committed the murder. There was overwhelming evidence against him. The real question was whether he could be held criminally responsible for his actions. His defense argued that he was insane, incapable of understanding what he had done. They called expert witnesses who described his lifelong struggle with schizophrenia, his extreme paranoia, and his delusions of grandeur. Psychiatric reports confirmed that his mental condition had been deteriorating for a long time, exacerbated by his isolated, transient lifestyle. The defense insisted that he was not a cold-blooded murderer, but a deeply sick man who had lost control of his mind. They pleaded with the court to recognize his insanity and spare him from a traditional prison sentence. The contradictory roles of accomplice and victim. Noella Higo's role in the crime was more ambiguous, and that ambiguity made her case just as contentious. She had not wielded the knife, had not physically harmed Valentine, yet she had stayed by Muert's side, never intervening, never seeking help. Prosecutors argued that she had enabled a dangerous man, feeding into his delusions instead of stopping him. Some even suggested that she had exercised a form of control over him, pushing him further into madness rather than trying to pull him out. The defense, however, painted her as a victim of psychological manipulation, a woman trapped in an unhealthy, dependent relationship with a man whose grip on reality was slipping away. Throughout the trial, Merritt sat mostly in silence, his face vacant, his demeanor eerily detached. There were moments when he seemed to barely comprehend the gravity of what was happening, moments when he mumbled about visions and divine messages. Higo, in contrast, remained stoic, but visibly tense. The Kalt family's presence in the courtroom was a constant reminder of what this case was truly about. Valentine's parents gave heartbreaking testimony about their son, the boy who had loved to ride his bike, who had dreamed of traveling the world, who had been taken from them in a moment of senseless violence. Their pain was immeasurable, their loss irreplaceable. When the verdict was finally read, there was no sense of victory, only a grim acceptance of the inevitable. Sten Muert was found guilty of murder, but was declared to have diminished responsibility due to his severe mental illness. He was sentenced to life in a high-security psychiatric hospital rather than a traditional prison. The ruling was a compromise of sorts, recognizing both the gravity of the crime and the undeniable reality of his condition. Noella Higo, meanwhile, was convicted of failing to prevent the crime and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. The decision sparked debate, with some feeling she had gotten off too lightly, while others believed she was as much a victim of Muert's madness as Valentine had been, trapped in a toxic, destructive partnership. The town forever changed. In the years that followed, the case remained a haunting memory in France's collective consciousness. It sparked widespread discussions about mental health, criminal responsibility, and the dangers of untreated psychiatric disorders. Questions were raised about how Imwerit had been allowed to wander the country unchecked for so long, how his illness had gone unnoticed or ignored until it was too late. For Valentine's family, no legal outcome could undo what had happened. His parents withdrew from public life, unable to bear the constant media attention that had followed the case. They moved away from La Nue, unable to walk the same streets where their son had once played. Their lives had been permanently altered by an encounter that lasted only minutes but left a wound that would never heal. La Nue itself changed after the murder. The town, once known for its quiet charm, became infamous for the crime that had taken place there. Strangers from other parts of France would mention it with hushed voices, associating it forever with the tragedy of that summer night. Parents became more protective. Children were no longer allowed to play outside as freely, and a deep-seated anxiety lingered long after the case had been closed. Mayor Rate remains confined in a psychiatric hospital, undergoing treatment that came far too late. His condition has reportedly not improved significantly, and he continues to talk about his mission, his voices, and his visions of a reality separate from the one everyone else lives in. Higo, meanwhile, served her time and was eventually released, disappearing from public view. Some believe she was a passive bystander who failed to act, while others see her as a manipulative presence who had fueled Merritt's madness rather than stopping it. But for those who knew Valentine, none of these details truly matter. His story is not about Mayworth's illness or Higo's complicity. It is about an innocent boy whose life was stolen in an act of senseless, unprovoked violence. It is about a family that lost their child, a town that lost its innocence, and a nation that was forced to confront the darkest corners of the human mind. In the end, it is about the tragedy of a life that should have been so much more, a life that ended far too soon in a moment that can never be undone. The memory of Valentine Kalt would live on, not as a symbol of his tragic death, but as a testament to the love and light he brought into the world, a light that was extinguished far too soon. The London Murders, a brutal end to a bright future. In the early hours of June 29, 2008, a profound quietude settled over the New Cross neighborhood in southeast London, a stillness that was soon to be shattered by an act of unimaginable brutality. The victims, two brilliant French postgraduate students, Laurent Bonomo and Gabrielle Fezy, both 23, were found murdered in a ground-floor flat on Sterling Gardens. In the sheer savagery of the attack, coupled with the subsequent arson that sought to conceal it, sent shockwaves through both the local community and their homeland in France. The event triggered an intense investigation by the Metropolitan Police, who were faced with a crime that defied all reason. Laurent Bonomo and Gabrielle Fezy were promising young men, biochemistry students from the esteemed Polytech Clermont-Ferrand in France. They had arrived in London as part of a 3-month exchange program at Imperial College, eager to advance their research and immerse themselves in the rich cultural tapestry of the city. Described by their peers and professors as brilliant and dedicated, both young men had bright and promising futures ahead of them. They were the embodiment of youthful ambition, and their tragic end was a cruel and senseless loss. On that fateful night, the dreams they had so carefully cultivated were extinguished in an instant. Emergency services were summoned to the flat due to reports of a fire. Upon extinguishing the flames, firefighters made a gruesome discovery. the bound and mutilated bodies of Bonomo and Fevzi. The post-mortem examinations that followed revealed a level of violence that was both frenzied and methodical. Bonomo had suffered an astonishing 1,906 stab wounds, while FZ had been stabbed 47 times. The majority of the injuries were concentrated on their heads, necks, and chests, indicating a prolonged and torturous ordeal. The fire, deliberately set using a gasoline-like accelerant, was intended to destroy evidence, but instead drew immediate attention to the heinous crime. Investigators faced immense pressure to solve the case swiftly, given its international implications and the sheer horror of the act. Initial inquiries uncovered that just a week prior to the murders, Bonomo's flat had been burgled, with a laptop reported stolen. This led detectives to consider whether the same perpetrator was involved, or if the burglary and murders were coincidental. The absence of forced entry suggested that the victims might have known their assailant, or perhaps the door had been left unsecured, a common practice in shared accommodations. As the investigation progressed, a significant breakthrough came when witnesses reported seeing a man fleeing the scene shortly after the fire was set. An EFIT, a computerized image of the suspect, was released, depicting a white male aged between 30 and 40, of a slight build, wearing a light-colored baseball cap and a dark top emblazoned with the word Junfan. This image, disseminated widely through media channels, prompted numerous tips from the public, each meticulously followed up by the police. The brutality of the murders, combined with the youth and potential of the victims, resonated deeply in both the UK and France. Vigils were held in their honor, with communities coming together to mourn the loss and express solidarity. The French government, alarmed by the violent deaths of its citizens abroad, collaborated closely with British authorities, offering resources and support to ensure justice was served. Despite the EFIT and public appeals, the investigation faced challenges. The lack of a clear motive, combined with the calculated attempt to erase evidence through arson, suggested a perpetrator who was both reckless and cunning. Detectives delved into the backgrounds of Bonomo and Fezi, searching for any clues that might hint at a reason for such targeted aggression. However, both were found to be exemplary students with no known enemies or involvement in activities that could provoke such violence. As days turned into weeks, the pressure mounted. The media scrutiny intensified, with headlines questioning the safety of international students in London and the efficacy of the police response. Behind the scenes, detectives worked tirelessly, re-examining evidence, conducting interviews, and liaising with international agencies. The haunting question remained: who could commit such a monstrous act, and why? Unbeknownst to the public, the investigation was on the cusp of a breakthrough that would shed light on the dark recesses of human nature and bring a semblance of justice to the grieving families. The police knew that solving the murders would require piecing together a puzzle where the most crucial elements were hidden in the ashes of the crime scene. The severity of the attack, over 240 stab wounds between the two victims, suggested not just a simple burglary gone wrong, but a crime driven by something far more sinister. Was it rage? Was it premeditated? Or was it the random act of a deeply disturbed individual? Investigators had to find out, and they had to do it fast. As forensic teams combed through the scorched remains of the flat, they found evidence that suggested the fire had been started deliberately using an accelerant. The purpose was clear. The killer had tried to destroy evidence, perhaps in a panic after realizing the brutality of what had been done. However, this act of desperation worked against the perpetrator. The fire hadn't consumed everything. Hidden beneath layers of soot and debris, key pieces of evidence remained intact, offering potential clues that would bring investigators closer to the truth. One of the most significant discoveries was a discarded latex glove near the bodies, partially melted by the fire. Inside, forensic scientists found traces of DNA that did not belong to either of the victims. This was a breakthrough. If they could match the DNA to someone in the system, they would have their suspect. But there was no immediate match. The killer, whoever they were, had no previous criminal record, or at least not one that was in the UK database. Meanwhile, detectives reviewed CCTV footage from surrounding streets, hoping to catch a glimpse of anyone suspicious near the scene on the night of the crime. Hours of footage were analyzed frame by frame, but nothing immediately stood out. The person who set the fire had moved carefully, avoiding the main roads where cameras were positioned. The only real lead came from eyewitness reports of a man seen running from the scene, wearing a dark top with the word Junfan on it. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As investigators worked tirelessly behind the scenes, the impact of the murders rippled through the community. Friends and fellow students of Lauron and Gabriel were devastated. Many spoke to the press about their memories of the two young men, how passionate they were about science, how they had come to London full of excitement for their futures. Their families, still in France, were in a state of shock, struggling to comprehend how their sons, who had only wanted to further their education, had met such a horrific fate. The pressure on law enforcement increased daily. The French government was closely monitoring the investigation, demanding swift action and justice for their citizens. The British media was relentless in its coverage, with headlines questioning the safety of foreign students in London and criticizing the Metropolitan Police for not making an arrest sooner. Public fear grew, with speculation that a violent predator was on the loose, possibly targeting students. In the midst of this, a name began to emerge: Nigel Farmer. Farmer was a known drug addict and burglar who had a history of violent behavior. He had a reputation for being a menace, but had never been linked to a crime of this magnitude. Detectives learned that Farmer had been released from prison just weeks before the murders. They also discovered that he had a history of drug use, which often led to violent and erratic behavior. He was a man with a dark past, a man who had no respect for the law or for human life. Forensic evidence soon provided the undeniable link. The DNA found on the latex glove at the crime scene was a direct match to Nigel Farmer. The match was a moment of profound relief for the investigators, a confirmation of what they had long suspected. The case was no longer a mystery. It was a matter of finding and apprehending a violent and dangerous criminal. Police launched a massive manhunt for Farmer, who was a ghost in the city, a phantom in the shadows. He had gone to ground, disappearing from his usual haunts, and his associates were too scared to talk. The media, which had been so critical of the police, now rallied behind them, broadcasting the EFIT and urging the public to be vigilant. A week later, Farmer was found hiding in a garden shed in the London suburb of Croydon. He was thin, gaunt, and looked like a man on the run, his body a testament to the life of a fugitive. He was apprehended without a struggle, his face a mask of defeat. In the interrogation room, he confessed to the murders, his voice a low, raspy whisper. He told the police that he had broken into the flat to steal the laptop and money, but had been surprised by the students. He had panicked, and in a moment of crazed, drug-fueled rage, he had attacked them. The details of his confession were a gruesome confirmation of the forensic evidence, and his account painted a chilling picture of a man who had lost control of his mind and his actions. The trial that followed was a grim affair, a public airing of a private tragedy. The families of Lauron and Gabriel sat in the courtroom, their faces etched with a profound and unyielding grief. They listened in silent agony as the details of their son's final moments were dissected in a grim and methodical manner. Farmer's defense argued that he was not a cold-blooded killer, but a man who had been driven to madness by a life of drug addiction and desperation. They spoke of his troubled past, his difficult upbringing, and the neglect he had endured. They argued that he was a victim of a system that had failed him. The prosecution, however, was unyielding. They argued that Farmer's actions were a clear sign of premeditation and that he had shown no remorse for his actions. They presented evidence of the number of stab wounds, the methodical way in which the victims were bound, and the deliberate act of arson that had been meant to destroy the evidence. The jury, faced with the overwhelming emotional weight of the case, had a difficult task ahead of them. They had to decide whether a man who had committed such a brutal and senseless act could be seen as anything other than a monster. They had to decide whether the law, a system of rules and regulations designed to protect society, could be applied to a mind that was so clearly unhinged. The deliberation was long and difficult, and the verdict, when it was finally read, sent a shockwave through the courtroom. Nigel Farmer was found guilty of murder. The verdict was a moment of grim and unprecedented victory for the prosecution, a legal ruling that would forever alter the way the British justice system viewed crimes committed by repeat offenders. The judge, in a somber and solemn voice, sentenced him to life in prison, a sentence that was meant to be both a form of punishment and a form of rehabilitation. The sentence was a compromise, an attempt to balance the need for justice with the recognition of Farmer's mental state. The judge spoke of the need for him to receive extensive psychological counseling and therapy, a glimmer of hope for a mind that was so clearly broken. The conviction of Nigel Farmer did not bring an end to the debate. The case became a permanent fixture in the annals of true crime, a cautionary tale of a man's descent into darkness, and a legal system struggled to find a way to deal with a crime that was both a product of an individual's will and an environment's influence. For the families of Laurent and Gabriel, no legal outcome could undo what had happened. Their sons were gone, taken by a force they could neither predict nor understand. Their lives had been permanently altered by an encounter that lasted only minutes, but left a wound that would never heal. The case of Laurent Bonomo and Gabriel FC was a grim and haunting tale of two young men who had come to London full of dreams and a city that was forced to confront the darkest corners of the human mind. The memory of their crime, a grim and haunting presence, would forever haunt the quiet streets of New Cross. In the end, it is a story not about the killer or the legal system, but about the tragedy of two lives that were stolen in an act of senseless, unprovoked violence. It is about a family that lost their children, a community that lost its innocence, and a nation that was forced to confront the brutal reality of a crime that can never be undone. Their story serves as a somber yet powerful call to prioritize empathy, support, and appreciation in our interactions with one another. The Yishun tragedy, a city's innocence lost. The quiet residential town of Yishun in northern Singapore was a place known for its serene suburban landscape and the predictable rhythms of daily life. The morning of September 19, 2008 began like any other, with residents preparing for the day ahead, but a sense of normalcy was about to be irrevocably shattered. A grim discovery was made at the foot of Block 349 on Yishun Avenue 11. There, in a place meant for community and a sense of shared security, lay the lifeless body of a woman. The police, summoned to the scene, were faced with a crime that was not only brutal, but deeply unsettling, its nature a dark stain upon the clean, orderly face of the city. The initial investigation at the scene of the discovery revealed the victim was a young Chinese woman. She was found in a state that was both tragic and mystifying, her body bearing the marks of a profound violence that defied easy explanation. The investigators, seasoned professionals accustomed to the dark underbelly of human nature, felt a chilling sense of foreboding. The case was no ordinary crime. The lack of visible struggle at the scene of the discovery and the nature of the injuries suggested that the woman had not fallen from a great height, but had been placed there, a chilling detail that pointed to a meticulously planned act of depravity. The search for answers led them to a nearby flat, a place that held the key to a scene of unimaginable horror. Inside the unassuming residential apartment, the police were met with a scene that was a macabre tableau of violence. The victim's body had been mutilated and placed inside a suitcase, a grim and haunting sight that would forever haunt the memories of the officers who witnessed it. This act of dismemberment suggested a cold, calculating perpetrator, someone who was not only capable of extreme violence, but also of a chilling sense of detachment. The level of violence was not only a measure of the killer's brutality, but also of their desperate attempt to hide their crime. The suitcase was a piece of evidence, a grim and undeniable link to the perpetrator, a puzzle that would be meticulously pieced together by the investigators. The apartment, with its sterile, ordered appearance, was a stark contrast to the chaotic and brutal crime that had unfolded within its walls. The investigation that followed was a painstaking process, a meticulous search for any clue that could lead them to the person responsible. Forensic teams combed every inch of the flat, their movements slow and deliberate as they tried to make sense of the senseless. They collected samples, dusted for fingerprints, and documented every detail of the crime scene, their focus a grim and unyielding testament to their dedication to their work. They found traces of blood, not only in the bathroom but throughout the apartment, a grim and haunting trail that suggested the murder had not been a quick, impulsive act, but a prolonged and torturous ordeal. The police, faced with a crime that was so heinous it defied all comprehension, were under immense pressure to find the person responsible. The case had captured the attention of the nation, and the public, with a growing sense of fear and unease, demanded answers. The unmasking of a neighbor. The initial investigation, with its focus on the crime scene, soon expanded to the surrounding neighborhood. The police conducted a door-to-door search, interviewing every resident in the block, their questions a quiet but persistent presence in the lives of the town's inhabitants. They were searching for any clue, any piece of information that could shed light on the murder. They asked about the victim, about her habits, her relationships, her daily routine. They spoke to her neighbors, her friends, and her family, their questions a quiet and meticulous unraveling of her life. The community, with its deep-seated sense of security and trust, was a strange and unsettling place for a crime of this magnitude to have taken place. But the police knew that even in the most idyllic of settings, hidden secrets and simmering resentments could lead to unimaginable tragedy. The breakthrough came when a neighbor, a man who had initially been reluctant to speak, came forward with a crucial piece of information. The man, a quiet and unassuming figure, told the police that he had heard a series of strange and disturbing sounds coming from the victim's apartment on the night of the murder. He spoke of muffled cries, the sound of a struggle, and a series of thudding noises as if someone was being hit. He had initially dismissed the sounds as a domestic dispute, but the sight of the police cars and the grim discovery at the foot of the building had filled him with a profound and terrible sense of dread. His testimony was a grim and undeniable piece of the puzzle, a link that would lead the police to their prime suspect. The investigation took a pivotal turn when the police were led to the apartment of a man named Abdul Rahmat, a 55-year-old taxi driver who lived on the same floor as the victim. The man, a quiet and unassuming figure, had initially denied any involvement in the murder, but his calm and detached demeanor, his lack of emotion, and the small details in his story that did not align with the evidence at the scene made the police suspicious. They found the keys to the victim's apartment in his possession, a cold and final piece of evidence that connected him to the crime. He was taken into custody, a small, quiet presence in the back of a police car, a confession and a trial of unspeakable horrors. Under intense interrogation, the man confessed to the crime, his voice a low, raspy whisper. He told the police that he had been in a relationship with the victim, a young Chinese woman who had been living in the apartment for several months. He spoke of a relationship that had been fraught with tension, a relationship that had been a source of both pleasure and pain. He told the police that he had been angered by her plans to leave him, to return to China, and in a moment of crazed, drug-fueled rage, he had attacked her. The details of his confession were a gruesome confirmation of the forensic evidence, and his account painted a chilling picture of a man who had lost control of his mind and his actions. The subsequent search of his apartment revealed a collection of tools that had been used in the dismemberment, a grim and undeniable link to the crime. The trial that followed was a grim affair, a public airing of a private tragedy. The families of the victim, still in China, had to rely on the media and the diplomatic channels to follow the case, their faces etched with a profound and unyielding grief. They listened in silent agony as the details of their daughter's final moments were dissected in a grim and methodical manner. The prosecution, in a long and meticulous process, laid out the details of the crime, their arguments a powerful and undeniable indictment of the man's actions. They spoke of the level of violence, the number of stab wounds, the methodical way in which the victim was dismembered, and the desperate attempt to hide the evidence. They argued that the man's actions were a clear sign of premeditation and that he had shown no remorse for his actions. The defense, however, argued that he was not a cold-blooded killer, but a man who had been driven to madness by a life of drug addiction and desperation. They spoke of his troubled past, his difficult upbringing, and the neglect he had endured. They argued that he was a victim of a system that had failed him. The jury, faced with the overwhelming emotional weight of the case, had a difficult task ahead of them. They had to decide whether a man who had committed such a brutal and senseless act could be seen as anything other than a monster. They had to decide whether the law, a system of rules and regulations designed to protect society, could be applied to a mind that was so clearly unhinged. The deliberation was long and difficult, and the verdict, when it was finally read, sent a shockwave through the courtroom. Abdul Rahmat was found guilty of murder. The verdict was a moment of grim and unprecedented victory for the prosecution, a legal ruling that would forever alter the way the Singaporean justice system viewed crimes committed by repeat offenders. The judge, in a somber and solemn voice, sentenced him to life in prison, a sentence that was meant to be both a form of punishment and a form of rehabilitation. The sentence was a compromise, an attempt to balance the need for justice with the recognition of the man's mental state. The judge spoke of the need for him to receive extensive psychological counseling and therapy, a glimmer of hope for a mind that was so clearly broken. A city forever changed. The conviction of Abdul Rahmat did not bring an end to the debate. The case became a permanent fixture in the annals of true crime, a cautionary tale of a man's descent into darkness and a legal system's struggle to find a way to deal with a crime that was both a product of an individual's will and an environment's influence. For the family of the victim, no legal outcome could undo what had happened. Their daughter was gone, taken by a force they could neither predict nor understand. Their lives had been permanently altered by an encounter that lasted only minutes, but left a wound that would never heal. The case of the Yushin tragedy was a grim and haunting tale of a young woman who had come to Singapore full of dreams and a city that was forced to confront the darkest corners of the human mind. The memory of the crime, a grim and haunting presence, would forever haunt the quiet streets of Yushin. In the end, it is a story not about the killer or the legal system, but about the tragedy of a life that was stolen in an act of senseless, unprovoked violence. It is about a family that lost their child, a community that lost its innocence, and a nation that was forced to confront the brutal reality of a crime that can never be undone. Their story serves as a somber yet powerful call to prioritize empathy, support, and appreciation in our interactions with one another. The case of the Talabudgera Creek cult, a web of deception. The serene landscape of Talabudgera Creek in Victoria, Australia, a place known for its peaceful waters and lush greenery, became the setting for a story that was as bizarre as it was terrifying. On the morning of February 1st, 2005, a couple, a man and a woman, appeared at a local police station, their bodies bruised and their faces a mask of profound terror. Their story was a chilling narrative of abduction, torture, and a satanic cult that had held them captive for 3 days. The couple, whom we will call Ben and Sarah to protect their identities, claimed to have been abducted by a group of men who they believed were part of a satanic cult. They had been held in a remote location, a dark and terrifying place where they had been subjected to unspeakable acts of violence and degradation. The couple's story, a grim and detailed account of their captivity, was a police officer's worst nightmare. They spoke of a cult of men with no names, a group of people who had been trained to inflict pain and torment. They described a series of acts that were not only brutal, but deeply ritualistic, a terrifying testament to a mind that was driven by a dark and malevolent purpose. The couple had escaped in a moment of sheer desperation, a harrowing and terrifying flight to freedom. They had run for hours, their bodies bruised and their faces a mask of fear, until they reached the safety of the police station. The police, faced with a story that was both unbelievable and terrifying, launched a full-scale investigation, their focus a grim and unyielding testament to their dedication to their work. The investigation that followed was a painstaking process, a meticulous search for any clue that could lead them to the alleged cult. Forensic teams were sent to the location where the couple claimed to have been held, their movements slow and deliberate, as they tried to find any evidence that could corroborate their story. They collected samples, dusted for fingerprints, and documented every detail of the crime scene, their focus a grim and unyielding testament to their dedication to their work. The police, faced with a crime that was so heinous it defied all comprehension, were under immense pressure to find the people responsible. The case had captured the attention of the nation, and the public, with a growing sense of fear and unease, demanded answers. The unraveling of a lie. The initial investigation, with its focus on the crime scene, soon expanded to the surrounding neighborhood. The police conducted a door-to-door search, interviewing every resident in the area, their questions a quiet but persistent presence in the lives of the town's inhabitants. They were searching for any clue, any piece of information that could shed light on the abduction. They asked about the couple, about their habits, their relationships, their daily routine. They spoke to their neighbors, their friends, and their family, their questions a quiet and meticulous unraveling of their lives. The community, with its deep-seated sense of security and trust, was a strange and unsettling place for a crime of this magnitude to have taken place. But the police knew that even in the most idyllic of settings, hidden secrets and simmering resentments could lead to unimaginable tragedy. The investigation took a pivotal turn when the police, with the help of a team of forensic psychologists, began to unravel the truth behind the couple's story. The couple, in a series of interviews, began to contradict themselves. The details of their story, a once consistent narrative of fear and terror, began to unravel, and the contradictions in their accounts became a red flag for the police. The psychological experts, in a grim and methodical manner, began to dissect their story, their focus a grim and unyielding testament to their dedication to their work. They found that the couple's account of the abduction, their captivity, and their escape was a meticulously constructed lie, a fabrication of a mind that was not only capable of a profound sense of deceit, but also of a chilling sense of detachment. The couple had inflicted the injuries upon themselves, a desperate and misguided attempt to create a story that would justify their absence. The police, faced with a crime that was so heinous it defied all comprehension, were under immense pressure to find the person responsible. The case had captured the attention of the nation, and the public, with a growing sense of fear and unease, demanded answers. The confession and its motive. Under intense interrogation, the couple, their faces a mask of defeat, confessed to their crime, their voices a low, raspy whisper. They told the police that they had been in a relationship that had been fraught with tension, a relationship that had been a source of both pleasure and pain. They spoke of a relationship that had been a source of immense financial strain, a relationship that had been a source of deep-seated resentment and a quiet, simmering anger. The man, in a voice filled with a profound sense of regret, told the police that he had been in debt, a financial burden that had been a source of immense stress and a constant source of tension in their relationship. The couple, in a desperate and misguided attempt to escape their financial problems, had created a story that they hoped would garner them some form of public sympathy and financial aid. They had planned the abduction, a meticulously constructed lie that they hoped would fool the police and the public. They had inflicted the injuries upon themselves, a desperate and misguided attempt to make their story seem real. The trial that followed was a grim affair, a public airing of a private tragedy. The couple, once the victims of a terrifying crime, were now the defendants in a case that was both bizarre and unprecedented. The prosecution, in a long and meticulous process, laid out the details of the crime, their arguments a powerful and undeniable indictment of the couple's actions. They spoke of the level of deception, the number of lies, the methodical way in which the couple had constructed their story, and the desperate attempt to deceive the police and the public. They argued that the couple's actions were a clear sign of premeditation, and that they had shown no remorse for their actions. The defense, however, argued that they were not cold-blooded criminals, but two people who had been driven to desperation by a life of financial hardship and emotional turmoil. They spoke of their troubled past, their difficult upbringing, and the neglect they had endured. They argued that they were victims of a system that had failed them. The jury, faced with the overwhelming emotional weight of the case, had a difficult task ahead of them. They had to decide whether a couple who had committed such a bizarre and senseless act could be seen as anything other than a monster. They had to decide whether the law, a system of rules and regulations designed to protect society, could be applied to a mind that was so clearly unhinged. The deliberation was long and difficult, and the verdict, when it was finally read, sent a shockwave through the courtroom. The couple was found guilty of a number of charges, including assault and fabricating evidence. The verdict was a moment of grim and unprecedented victory for the prosecution, a legal ruling that would forever alter the way the Australian justice system viewed crimes committed by repeat offenders. The judge, in a somber and solemn voice, sentenced them to a lengthy prison term, a sentence that was meant to be both a form of punishment and a form of rehabilitation. The sentence was a compromise, an attempt to balance the need for justice with the recognition of the couple's mental state. The judge spoke of the need for them to receive extensive psychological counseling and therapy, a glimmer of hope for a mind that was so clearly broken, a community's innocence lost. The conviction of the couple did not bring an end to the debate. The case became a permanent fixture in the annals of true crime, a cautionary tale of a couple's descent into darkness and a legal system's struggle to find a way to deal with a crime that was both a product of an individual's will and an environment's influence. The case of the Talabajara Creek cult was a grim and haunting tale of a couple who had come to a peaceful town in search of a new life and a community that was forced to confront the darkest corners of the human mind. The memory of the crime, a grim and haunting presence, would forever haunt the quiet streets of Talabajara Creek. In the end, it is a story not about a satanic cult or a brutal abduction, but about the tragedy of a lie that was created in a moment of desperation, a lie that would destroy a family and leave a community with a profound and unyielding sense of betrayal. The story serves as a somber yet powerful call to prioritize empathy, support, and appreciation in our interactions with one another.